Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Leni Chef, and in today's video I will be discussing a very personal topic of what it's like to be a non-ethnic minority born and raised in Russia versus a non-ethnic Russian in the United States. Let's go. First off, let me introduce my ethnic background. I am Bashkir, and it is an ethnic minority indigenous to Russia, specifically the southern part of Ural Mountains. We are about 1,000 years old, even more, and genetically we are Europeans and Asians, Eurasian mix. So we stand right in between Eastern Europe and North and Central Asia, the part of Asia which has been heavily neglected compared to East Asia, China, Japan, and South Korea, and even Southeast Asia. And by the looks, typically we tend to look anything between, Eastern European, we can have lighter complexion, lighter eyes, lighter hair, all types of structures of hair and textures of hair, down to like really Asian looking, depending on the tribe. Because historically, there were around 45 different tribes of Bashkirs, north, west, east, and south. And my bloodline comes from the northeast of Bashkortostan. So Bashkortostan is literally land of Bashkirs. And this is how I look like, but my relatives, they also have, some of them from both sides have lighter skin, lighter eyes, but both of my parents have brown eyes and my mom has tan skin, so this is my look. And to many Western people, I look either Southeast Asian or Latina, but we'll get to that later. And we have our own very distinct language. It is Bashkir language, which is completely different from Russian. It was heavily influenced by Farsi and Arabic way in the past, and also ancient Turkic language, which is the great-grandmom to all the Turkic languages. We're close to Kazakh, Tatar, Kyrgyz, Uzbek, Azerbaijani, even Turkish people, and all other kinds of Turkic peoples. And we did adopt some Russian words eventually because we were annexed by Russians throughout the whole period of Russian history. And we're Muslims by religion. We used to be pagans, but then, Ibn Fadlan, when he had his pilgrimage in 922, if I am not mistaken, Bashkirs converted into Muslims, Islam, the Sunni Islam. Some of us can be really religious, and women would wear hijabs, pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, and some of us are very secular, like myself, and we don't really follow the religion, even though, yes, we're Muslims. Some Bashkirs are Orthodox Christians, but the vast majority are Muslims. And Islamic holidays are celebrated on a national level, especially in Bashkortostan and Tatarstan, our neighbors and the closest Turkic people, brothers and sisters that you can have. That's a brief history. So growing up in my own Republic of Bashkortostan was a pretty safe space because everyone is pretty mixed. Our republic is multinational. We have Bashkirs, Russians, Tatars, we have Mordva, Buryat, all the nations, because Russia is ethnically diverse in general. And it was pretty okay to be looking like this and to be me. Yes, I was teased for my tan skin, called Blackie as a kid, but kids are mean, so it is what it is. But definitely, I was lucky because up until the age of 22, I lived in Russia. I was not too exposed to any other cities of Russia because I simply couldn't afford to travel. I was depending on my parents, and my family is really broke. And I honestly have seen and have traveled a lot more in the US because my young adulthood started in America, because at the age of 22 I left the country. It was like way back over 10 years ago. And that's where my adventure started, because for the most part, someone who looks like me is perceived as Asian and more exotic, whatever. And there is a very typical, ongoing, persistent stereotype, which is very annoying to me till this day, that if a Western person, specifically American, sees someone from Russia, they expect you to look a certain way, aka blonde with blue eyes stereotype, which is true to a certain extent, but there are a lot of blondes with blue eyes among Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, Spanish, Brits, Germans, and even Northern Italians, and some Portuguese, and also some other nationalities that you wouldn't expect to be more lighter complexion. And I definitely fall out of that stereotype, and I can be a perfect spy. Jokes aside, but that's true. And they also were thrown off by my accent, which is a lot softer. I do not speak in a very typical Russian hard accent way. I can do that in a mocking way, but I don't like that accent personally. And the perk of being a Bashkir is I'm bilingual by default. So my first language was Bashkir, specifically a certain dialect which sounds more like Tatar language, and the pronunciation of the official Bashkir language is different. For example, you just have to hear the difference. The word hello, the formal word hello, in Russian sounds as здравствуйте. And in Bashkir, in my dialect, sounds as isyanmisiz or solmasız. Здравствуйте, isyanmisiz, solmasız, versus homaharav. That's the official Bashkir version. Homaharav. And Bashkir, like my own native language, did help me to catch up English a lot faster because there are certain vowels and consonants which do not exist in Russian, but we do have in my own native language that helped me nail the English pronunciation much better than any typical Slavic person would ever imagine and could do, which is a big plus. And I only saw those perks once I started learning English at school at the age of 11 and a half, almost 12. And like I mentioned before, many Americans would perceive me as Asian. Way back in the days when I was in my early 20s and, still had a chubbier face, they thought I was Chinese twice. Funny, because this nose is very far from East Asian. Like people from East Asia usually have more like flat bridge and like smaller noses. And also Latina, Argentinian at least twice. And also Filipino, which is funny because I did see Filipino women. I mean, maybe when I traveled to Philippines, there might be a resemblance. Yes, I have brown eyes, I have darker skin. When I get tan, I get really dark. I end up having really nice bronzy skin tone. Right now, this is my pale. And I saw Filipino women. First of all, they're usually shorter than me. I am like about 5'4", 5'5", which is in centimeters, 164 centimeters. And typical Filipino woman that I saw in the US, they're shorter. They're like around 5'2". They're like really petite and tiny. And they have more adorable face features and smaller noses. No fucking, bulbosity and like a hump here. I said what I said. Yes, they do look confusing. They do look like something in between Spanish and Asian because of their genotypical heritage and like historical influence of Spanish way back in the days. But I guess like I do not look Filipino in my own eyes. Like I'm far from that. I'm so serious. And I'm like my frame, my whole body is actually bigger. Moving on to male perception. And the main point of it is fetishization, guys. Any woman who is not a typical European looking girl, aka she's any type of Asian, any type of mixed, and any type of black, she understands the point. Women have been heavily objectified by men throughout the entire history of patriarchy, but specifically having lived in Brooklyn, New York, and I love New York and I hate New York and I miss New York, but we'll get to that later, I would usually attract men who are also like kind of ethnic minorities and typically black or Latina that gravitate towards this exotic look. I kind of understand why, but I just don't like being fetishized because I'm not an object, I am not a doll, I'm not a puppet, and I really hate the fact that specifically Asian women have been fetishized by Western men of all kinds and backgrounds heavily. And that irks me and rubs me the wrong way. Women who have been in this situation will totally understand. Have I been white? Yes, there's a certain fetishization from black men of white women. But being, mixed looking like this, it hits even harder and it hurts harder. And it's funny how these are two types of men that I don't physically gravitate towards. I'm not saying that I don't find them attractive. Yes, I do. But it's not my cup of tea. You know what I'm saying? And I have my own preferences. I'm going to keep them secret. But yeah, and I just didn't really like it. And also, ethnic Russian men, because they will be perceived as typical white men, be he blonde, be he redheaded, or like slightly darker hair. They would also fetishize Turkic women because it's also this Asian fetish. Or you're Tatari or like Bashkir, oh my god. I hate the fact that people, specifically men, especially Western men and ethnic Russians, they have this stereotype of a submissive Bashkir, Tatar, whatever kind of Asian wife, which is not true, especially in my case personally. I'm very feisty, I'm very outspoken, I'm very blunt and straightforward. A lot of Russian women are, and it's like, it's the culture, okay? Like Russian people, we cut the bullshit, we don't like to beat around the bush. Some specific people do, but I'm not the kind of woman. I may be perceived as a very intimidating bitch, but I don't care. And yeah, like this was my experience in the US, especially towards like from Western men. It feels wrong, but that's the reality. I really want this to change because I want to be perceived as a person first, not just as a doll for your sexual fantasies. Now, hopping back to Russia, I lived in Moscow for a year, or should I rather say survive. I hated Moscow. And even though Russia is ethnically diverse, Moscow is still very racist towards Central Asians. Let me tell you why. Because there are so many people from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, whatever. Unfortunately, because of their economical situation in general, Moscow attracts people from poor villages of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, whatever, and unfortunately not the best contingent, aka people who don't really speak Russian as much. They're very illiterate, and also, speaking of men, not the best people of their crowd, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying to be kind of polite because, yes, it's a lot of Turkic people like me, but they're not Bashkirs. They lack the manners and they cannot read the room of Russia because Russia in general is more Europeanized than it's Asian, especially like the Moscow part. And unfortunately, way back in the days, especially like in the late 1990s, there was skinhead culture, racism was, and nationalism and chauvinism was flying over the roof. And growing up as a teenager in my own home city of Ufa, I often would hear these talks and conversations of adults like my parents and my relatives that when you move to Moscow and you're an ethnic minority and you look a certain, like this kind of way, not European, and you have a certain name, which in my case, like I said, I have a very long and rare Bashkir last name and also not a typical and not popular first name, you will be perceived in a certain way. People will question you, and unfortunately even in 2025, 2026, that shit happens. It saddens me, and I really faced it firsthand looking for apartments for myself and rooms, and I had to use a shortened version of my name, which is not my name, but more of like a common name, which is common not only for non-ethnic Russians like us Bashkirs or Tatars, but also for Russians. And it rubbed me the wrong way, and I had to justify my own presence. Even though I'm a Russian citizen, I speak perfect fluent Russian, even better Russian than ethnic Russians themselves, yes. Так, мой русский лучше иногда, чем мой башкирский, серьезно, и лучше, чем у русских. This pisses me off. Like 2025, 2026, the 21st century, and we're still dealing with this bullshit, even though we're like ethnically diverse country. And honestly, blending in as a non-ethnic Russian immigrant in New York was a lot easier. And New York being a capital of the world, yes, I'm very biased because I love New York, I hate New York, and I miss New York. And I hate Moscow to the fucking core. Living there was a nightmare for me because, yes, I moved to Moscow, like burnout and whatever. But anyways, Moscow is not a capital of the world. Let's fucking face it. It's not my kind of city. And to my liking, New York is much better. Like I said, yes, New York is dirtier. It's less safer, especially after COVID. Moscow is nicer. And as a tourist destination, Moscow offers you so much comfort. The subway system is amazing because it's the capital and a lot of money basically flows into Moscow infrastructure. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous. Tourist destination, top notch, 10 out of 10, highly recommend. But in terms of living, I would prefer New York. Yes, racism does prevail in the US too, but it's different. It has its own problems. But in New York, because so many people are from like across the globe, they flocked to New York because of the opportunities, especially when it was in the past before Trump. I hope that orange clown just ends his reign. Thank God. Like hopefully, and I'm just praying. Like I said, blending in New York was much easier because it's an immigrant city, and people, yes, they will be thrown off and flabbergasted by your very long ass name, whoever you are, but they're more welcoming and they're more used to it compared to Russians in Moscow. And mind you, I am a Russian citizen, god fucking damn it. It pisses me off. So to me, if I am to choose between New York and Moscow, New York, hands down. I'm very fucking biased. I love New York, and I hate New York because New York was difficult to live at. Like, New York wins all the time. Moscow was a different experience. Yes, some people live there better, but you have better chances, surviving in Moscow when you're actually ethnically Russian. You look more European, aka white. You have a very typical name of, I don't know, Maria Ivanova, Masha Ivanova, or Natalia, or Katerina, or Lizaveta, Petrova, Ivanova, Sidorova, whatever Russian last name, compared to, let's say, I don't know, Zuhra Zakhridinova, whatever. Like anything non-Slavic will throw people off. And it's funny how ethnic Russians may not even know that, let's say, Yakutia is a part of Russia. I'm exaggerating when some people really don't realize it. Oh, I hate Moscow. Sorry, I fucking hate Moscow to the core. Conclusion. So being a non-ethnic Russian in the part of Russia I come from, like in my own republic, is much safer spot compared to Moscow. Being a non-ethnic Russian immigrant is easier. It's more acceptable compared to being a non-ethnic Russian citizen in Moscow. You get the point. Yes, again, like I said, it's a very biased opinion, but that's my reality. And a lot of people who look a certain way like this, who are from Dagestan, Chechnya, whatever, they can look very Arabic, or let's say Armenians. They also face this problem because they also have their own typical cultural names, their languages. They will understand the pain. And that was my experience personally. If you guys can share your own stories, let's say if you're a non-ethnic minority somewhere from the US or from whatever country you're watching, leave comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry, I've been having a migraine and I've been feeling like shit. So recording this video is a heroic act for me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it useful, and see you in my next ones. Bye.